The San Diego Padres went from irrelevant to pretty interesting over the winter. Of course, signing one of baseball's best players will do that for you, but it wasn't just the addition of Manny Machado that put them in the conversation of teams that maybe shouldn't be contenders, but kind of could be. What's up, everybody? I'm Sarah Wellman. Welcome back to Birdseeds. If you've been here before, you know the drill, but if this is your first time to my channel, here's the too long didn't read version. I cover the St. Louis Cardinals for birdsontheblack.com, and I create weekly videos here like game recaps, these series previews, and more. So if that sounds interesting to you, go ahead and subscribe. Now, Chris Bauer is a repeat guest of the show, and he is here today to help us get a clearer picture of what kind of Padres team we will see taking on the St. Louis Cardinals in their home opener. Well, Chris, thanks so much for joining me again this season. How are things? I mean, the last time we talked, we spent probably more time than necessary emphasizing how much better the weather is there than it is in the Midwest, but I imagine that's still true.
Yeah, it's still, the weather is still pretty awesome. Although the good news is we have a lot more fun stuff to talk about this time than we did last year. It's not the weather, so I'm excited for that. And hey, by the way, thank you for having me back. I had a blast last year, and I have to say it's a bit of an honor to be had on by somebody with as much baseball knowledge as you do. I'm totally serious. So thank you for having me back. That means a lot.
I certainly appreciate that, and it's a lot of fun for me. You know, I was telling someone just today that I'm a bit of a junkie when it comes to this stuff. So I love having the chance to talk to other people who are as invested and obviously know more about these teams that I don't follow as closely. So I appreciate your input on all things Padres. But as you mentioned, bit more of an exciting off-season and start to the year for the Padres than last year. Of course, when you sign a 10-year, $300 million contract with one of the best players in baseball, things get a little more interesting. So I guess let's start there, just because I have to ask you, what was it like to get that news? How did you find out when it was being finalized, and what was your reaction to it?
Definitely didn't believe it at first. Very incredulous, especially the way that it happened with the Padres throughout most of the offseason. To be honest, they were broadcasting the story that was, this isn't the year for that. Like, they were basically pushing this, we hear you, but we're not ready to spend the money. And so all of a sudden when that started changing, you kind of went back to thinking, well, you know, who knows what that really means. They seemed very sure of themselves. Like, they wouldn't just, like, you know, for no reason just throw that out there to, you know, temper their fans' enthusiasm that the Padres aren't going to make a big splash. So it was a little hard to believe at first. I found out about it like a lot of things on Twitter. I don't know if my boss is going to be watching this, but I found out in the office. Yeah, I found out on Twitter, checked. I think it was MLB that tweeted it out first before it was official. And
that's right. They tweeted it and then had to take it down, right?
Yeah,
it was like, well, maybe not.
Yeah, they had the Photoshop Manny Machado picture and everything. And I wasn't the only one I found out who did this, but I'm like inspecting the tweet, you know, like, okay, that's a blue check mark. That's not a fake blue check mark. That is MLB. And it says that they signed him. And, you know, obviously went a little crazy with happiness. It was a pretty fun day. Well, pretty fun time. Padres fans, a bunch of us got together that night to celebrate at a brewery. We did a big group podcast that was also really fun that I was on, and we all had some. We were drinking 394, the Tony Gwynn beer,
as one does.
Yeah, as Padres fans do, and it's like the craziest time in history to be a Padres fan.
Yeah,
so it was a lot of fun being around the community too, I have to say, and just being able to hang out with everyone and talk about it and have a blast, just reveling in Manny Machado. I gave my buddy Rick the biggest hug I think I've ever given him. Like, picked him off the ground. It was like twirling him around.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because I saw the news and I kind of went, wait, the Padres?
Yeah.
Because it kind of seemed
like
exactly. It seemed a little bit, not necessarily out of nowhere, but not necessarily what everyone was expecting, where all the signs were pointing, right? So, and I think it makes a little more sense now. And as, you know, everyone sort of was trying to process, it was like, well, you know, okay, 10-year contract. They've got a ton of really great young talent. So this isn't maybe necessarily for Machado a thing about right now, but it's about the duration of a 10-year contract. You want to be in an organization that's going to be competitive. I feel like that gave it a little bit of context that made a little more sense. As we went through the winter and now into the first week or so of the regular season, the Padres have made a bit of a shift going from this, we're going to be good in a few years, to we might actually be good now. What has it been like kind of watching that progression from adding Manny Machado to then seeing all the things that happened after that to get them where they are now?
Well, I do have to say, getting back to the Machado signing for a second, if you forget all the stuff you ever knew about the Padres, the signing did make a lot of sense.
Right.
Because they really needed third baseman. They have a hole in their development pipeline. Hudson Potts was a third baseman, but he was a longer way off and wasn't the top prospect. So they really, really needed a third baseman. They needed a star, and they had the money. At least they didn't have that many other contracts signed. So that perspective, it made sense. And like you pointed out, I think it did bring forward the window a little bit for contention. The Padres started behaving a little bit differently. I think it would be fair to say that they wouldn't have brought up Fernando or Tatis right away to start the season if they didn't say, look, we have a prime year of Manny Machado. We don't want to waste this. They started Chris Paddack, another one of the Padres' top prospects. And yeah, so I think they're it's definitely fair to say that they brought the window up a little bit. I think Fangraphs has them projected at 80 wins right now. They were at 66 last year, so quite a jump.
Bit of a jump.
Yeah, although it is a young team, so I think there are a lot of possibilities there. I can see them win, 84 wins or maybe 74 wins, just because it depends on how the development of those young players goes. But yeah, Manny Machado did bring up their floor as well, where you can just say, compared to pretty much any other player out there, yeah, we'll go ahead and add 4 projected wins to their total.
Now, you mentioned they did go ahead and put Fernando Tatis Jr. on the opening day roster. That was a big deal for a lot of teams, right? Because we talk about service time manipulation and see it happen all over the place, and it's just kind of one of those things at this point that it's like, yeah, it's bad, but everyone's doing it. But the Padres opted to not do it. And my understanding is that Machado and Eric Hosmer are kind of part of the reason for that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so a story came out that Manny Machado and Eric Hosmer took Padres owner Ron Fowler out to dinner and said, we want you to put Fernando Tatis on the opening day roster, and he agreed. That's what the story was. I think it's a little bit interesting that they took the owner, Ron Fowler, and not the general manager. And it's sort of like a Scott Boras thing to do of like, well, we want this thing to happen, so we're just going to go to the owner and skip the GM anyway. He'll just overrule the GM and we'll get what we want.
Yeah.
And I guess it worked.
Evidently, that was the right move.
Although he's the one writing the checks, so if he wants to make that call, maybe he's got a much larger check to write when Tatis's contract or Tatis's 6 years are up and he becomes a free agent.
Yeah, I guess.
But I know the other. Oh, sorry to interrupt.
I was just going to say, I guess if you have to convince anyone, it's the guy that's going to have to write the check at some point. So, smart move. Smart move.
So the impeller's like, well, dude, you made that choice. You can write that check.
Exactly.
One thing I think that it did do as well is improve the relationship between the Padres and Fernando Tatis.
Yeah.
They said, look, we care about you. We're going to do what's best for the team. We're going to do what's best for you. And you've seen a lot of these contracts from young players come out. 2 of them came out today. And hopefully the Padres have something like that under wraps, or they're working on it with Tatis, and they can point to this move to put him on the open day roster and say, look, man, we're on the same team as you. We want to maintain this positive relationship with you. And hopefully that helps them out down the road for that.
There's no abundance of goodwill between players and teams these days, so it certainly can't hurt. But just from a talent perspective, what have you seen from him? There's been so much excitement, so much of this, kind of let's wait and see when he finally gets his chance. Well, he's got his chance. So what is it that people are going to see from him?
So Tatis is a good shortstop. There have been some people who think that he might not stick around at shortstop, but from a Padres fan's perspective, the last really good shortstop they had was Khalil Green. So it's been a number of years, and Cardinals fans, you guys are familiar with Khalil Greed.
Well aware of how that ended.
Yeah, yeah. And before that, it was like Gary Templeton. It's been a long time. They traded away Trey Turner, so shortstop has always been a bit of a sore spot for the Padres. So right off the bat, he's a player who can stick around at short. He's got a lot of power. We're talking, maybe 30 home runs at his peak. He's fast. In spring training, there was a play where he scored on a single, like a ground ball single almost, to the center fielder, and he made it to third on that, and then just timed a run home to score when the center fielders kind of lobbed the ball in. So scored from first on a single. He's a fast player. Hopefully that speed helps out on defense as well. So it's pretty rare that you see that combination of skills from a player, and that's what I think what makes him so special is he can hit for average too. He's not really known as an on base machine, but with the kind of skills that he does have, that's the making of a really special player. And yeah, we're really excited. He hit his first home run. I think that was last night, and it was just a jack. It was just like 10 rows back. It's such a sweet swing. My gosh, it's really exciting. Really exciting time to watch him play.
And I think it speaks a lot to not only his raw talent, but kind of the maturity at such a young age for guys like Machado and Hosmer to really go to bat for him and say, hey, like this is a guy that needs to be playing every day, not hanging out waiting until there's a better reason to. So that's, I think, says a lot about him as well. But when you look at kind of the offensive pieces they have, Hosmer, Machado, Tatis, what do you make of kind of where they can be? Of course, again, pitching and hitting all around, there's a lot of youth on this team, so it's sort of a crapshoot trying to predict it. But what have you seen so far that gives you some sort of indication of what they can be?
It's hard to say. One thing that's interesting about the Padres' position players is they're really deep in the Major League roster. They came into the offseason with a deep outfield, especially after the Will Myers at third base experiment didn't work out. So he went back to the outfield, and all of a sudden you've got a lot of outfielders, not quite as many infielders, at least at the beginning of the offseason, but now between Greg Garcia, who turns out probably isn't going to play as pivotal of a role as
Greg.
we thought. Yeah, sorry.
He thought he was finally going to get a chance.
Yeah. There's another Padres third base prospect who kind of made noises about having an opportunity, and he wasn't really that great of a prospect, but it would have been like his only chance pretty much in his, in the foreseeable future to have a starting job, and that kind of went out the window for him too. So between Garcia and obviously Hosmer and Tatis and also Ian Kinsler, the Padres also have Luis Urias, who is a very fine second baseman, currently in AAA because it just, well, I don't have a great answer for that. He's a great player. I might have preferred Urias over Kinsler at second, but they signed Kinsler when they thought they need more infielders. And then at catcher, you have Austin Hedges and Mejia as well. So a couple good young catchers. They're deep. And at first base, Myers is really also a first baseman. So they're definitely deep all across the board at this point. And I think that's what made the Machado signing, well, among many other things. That's one thing that made so much sense was it really completed the picture. They've got a lot of depth. They've got a lot of players who can be starters on good teams. And I think the offense doesn't really have a lot of room for improvement at this point. Hopefully, you've got a lot of depth, a lot of room for players to get injured or to not work out the way you hope, and still have a pretty good offense. The pitching staff is a little bit of a different story. I remember last year I was joking about Clayton Richard being the opening day starter. So things have gotten
a little way since then.
Yeah, although not a ton better, to be honest. Chris Paddack is an amazing young prospect. He's got a strong fastball, a wicked changeup, and a curveball that's still kind of developing. But he's a rookie, so outside of him, you've got some kind of mid to back end starters. Not quite as deep as the offense, but there's some interesting players there.
And still very young, right? I mean, a lot of those guys that are going to get starting opportunities you, again, don't really know what to expect because they're just so young.
Yeah. Pretty much everyone I mentioned outside of Hosmer and Machado is,
Right.
25 under for the most part? Maybe 26?
Yeah. Yeah. So when you look at that starting rotation, obviously we can talk more about Paddack, but he kind of took spring training by storm, and everyone's got their eyes on him as far as what he can do, just punching a lot of strikeouts. The transition is always interesting for me from the guys who are superior pitchers in the minor leagues to guys who can replicate that when they're doing it every 5 days in the major leagues. The Cardinals have seen that over and over again because they develop so much pitching, but some of the guys that you expect to be able to do it then can't. Asa Gomber for the Cardinals was expected to really challenge for a rotation spot this year, and he ended up not even making the major league roster because he just couldn't get outs consistently when he's facing, big league hitting. So when you look at that rotation, Paddack included, is there anything specific that you're looking for? And to be fair, we're recording this on Tuesday night, and all the starters for the series against the Cardinals haven't been announced either way yet. So I'm kind of talking vaguely because I don't know exactly who we're going to see in that series. But any one of these guys, I think, falls into the same category of watching them very closely to see how they make that transition.
Yeah. The big question, I think, is Chris Paddack. He, if going back to the Machado signing, if that hadn't happened, he, as well as Tatis, might not have been in the majors this year. Paddack, like I mentioned, has that fastball and the changeup, but the curveball is still kind of developing. So I think that's what you're looking for from him. He threw it some in spring training. I actually had a chance to witness. I think he struck 6 guys out in a row at the spring training game that we were at. It was nuts. It was against the A's. So, for that transition from not even AAA, he didn't even play in AAA, to the majors, that curveball is going to be the thing for him. And, I was thinking also about some of the pitchers that the Padres have developed. I think Matt Latos kind of took the league by storm. I think that was 2010 when he really propelled the team. But going back to Jake Peavy, who was the last really good pitcher the Padres developed, he played in the majors for at least, 2003, and I think he debuted in 2002 as well. And then it wasn't until 2004 that he really became the front-end pitcher that we think of him as now. So pitchers especially, I think you're right, it takes a little longer to develop. So in terms of the Padres this season, the pitching staff is really going to be the question mark. It might not work out the way that we hope, but it's certainly exciting, and more exciting than it's been in a long time.
Who are you most excited about outside of Paddack when you look at the guys that are in that rotation? Or who do you think is going to be the most interesting to watch this season?
It's got to be Joey Lucchesi. He's got a really interesting delivery. He's got a left-handed delivery, and it's super funky, almost like a Clayton Kershaw delivery. I'm not comparing him to Clayton Kershaw. I'm just saying the delivery is similar. It's really funky. He reaches up to start with and then kind of bends his knees a lot before delivering and almost falls back. It's hard to describe it. I'm sitting here in a chair. But if he does start, I'd watch for that. So he had a great debut last year. He was about an average pitcher as a rookie, which is pretty solid. But he's really fun to watch just because of that cool delivery and because he's a good pitcher too.
That always helps. Who are you most concerned about?
Who am I concerned about? Well, Matt Strahm made the move from the bullpen last year to the starting rotation this year. The Padres seem to really like him, but he didn't have a great debut in the rotation. It's hard to say if he was missing spots or if he was missing his stuff or balls were just it's just one game, so who really knows? But I'd say if I were concerned, he's a guy who doesn't really have the pedigree. There was also another starting pitcher who made the opening day roster, Nick Marjavicius, who I know almost nothing about.
Glad you said his last name because I was going to try to say it. But
I can't guarantee I even said it right just then. It's funny with him. The beat writer for the Union Tribune, Kevin Acee, about halfway through spring training, tweeted something about how Nick had a chance to make the opening day rotation, and he's never pitched above high A.
Yeah.
So Kevin Acee, credit to him for having that call, but he's also kind of new to being a beat writer, at least for the Padres. for baseball. So a lot of like the older like people on social media who've been following the team for a long time were kind of like, oh, dude, come on, man, like get real. He hasn't pitched above high A, understandably, but here he is in the starting rotation. So it's definitely interesting. I couldn't tell you much about him, to be honest. He was never a big time prospect. The Padres just see something about him that they like, and they know pitching, so, who am I to argue?
Right. I would assume, or I would always like to assume, that the team knows a little more about that than we do when we're not there every day. But yeah. That's a jump. That's an interesting jump. So last year, Jordan Hicks did that for the Cardinals, but not to the rotation, into the bullpen. All he did last year was throw 105 miles an hour, so I can see why there was an appeal there to put him on the Major League staff. But it's an interesting jump because... again, with pitchers, they have to learn how to miss better bats. And part of the problem for Jordan Hicks last year is he wasn't missing many bats. He could throw 105, but guys were still able to get a piece of it. And so it minimized how effective he was at times. So it's such an interesting jump to try to make because they're learning all of that on the fly, and the natural progression is that you learn it a little bit at a time instead of trying to make all those changes all at once. So I think that it's a really interesting call when something like that happens because it is unusual, and it's unusual for a reason. So I actually think he's one of the few announced starters for the series. He'll be facing off against Jack Flaherty, another young guy for the Cardinals, who did not have a great first start last week. So looking to recover a little bit in the home opener. With all of that youth, I imagine it has to be really, really valuable to have someone like Eric Hosmer who's been around, who knows the drill, who can kind of act as not only leader on the field, but also just like the guy who's been there. A lot of these guys haven't ever been on a Major League roster before, and it's nice to have, I would assume, someone like Hosmer around.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up because, well, we did talk about that beforehand.
We did talk about it beforehand.
Yeah, we did plan that. So I do have something interesting to share with you related to Hosmer. I know you might have been surprised when the Padres signed him. I know a lot of Padres fans were. So one thing that I can say about the reason that the Padres did sign him last year, first of all, it almost seemed like they had Eric Hosmer on the team, and that player was called Will Myers. Sort of,
Fair.
Some little bit of power, a first baseman, not a lot of defensive value elsewhere. So I was a little bit confused about that. And one thing that I can say is that the Padres, first of all, did sign Eric Hosmer to be a baseball player, to provide value on the field. But like you said, they also signed him to be a leader on the team and in the clubhouse. And one thing that I can say is that there are people within the Padres organization who do value a lot of the traits that actually the Cardinals organization has in that regard. Have you heard that before? You smiled kind of knowingly.
There's so much, there's some similarities, I think, in some of the players that they value. So I'm not surprised to hear that is why I'm smiling.
Okay. That makes sense then. And one thing that I did learn is I think it explains a little bit about the Jed Jerko trade from a few years ago. First of all, Jerko was my boy. I think we talked about him last year. I was disappointed to see him go. But part of the reason for that I've sort of put the pieces together on is that the Padres value the skills and the culture that exists with the Cardinals clubhouse. And part of the reason for that trade was to bring in John Jay and help change that. Same thing with Eric Hosmer. He, I'm told, has a lot of those skills. I don't think I'm ever not going to be a little bit skeptical of that. But I've also never been in a major league clubhouse before. And in addition to that, one thing that I have heard is that in the past, the Padres clubhouse wasn't the most supportive environment between some of the players who were in there. And so that goes back to John Jay. That goes back to Eric Hosmer. The Padres think that that supportive environment, that friendly environment where players help each other out, as opposed to sort of seeing themselves as like silos on their own, is something the Padres are working on changing. So hopefully Hosmer provides some value there. It's questionable whether or not he's going to provide that kind of value in the field. He's kind of he's your average first baseman at this point. He's had his up years and down years. I don't know if that was going to continue to be the pattern, but I also said that about the Giants the year before they won the World Series, and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me, but it still happened. So maybe they'll have that, or maybe Hosmer will have that every other year pattern continue. But I'm skeptical. I think at this point he's an average to above average, slightly above average first baseman who helps the team in other ways that I might not ever understand.
You mentioned the pattern. Actually, one of the comments I got on Twitter from my buddy Graham was that, Hosmer's better in odd-numbered years, right? So are you excited for odd-number year Hosmer? But you should also know that Greg Garcia was known amongst Cardinals fans as Good Guy Greg. So if you need a good clubhouse guy, there's another one you can add to the list. Good Guy Greg.
Yeah, maybe that explains why he's on the roster right now.
Yeah,
and not Urias or something.
There you go. No, but Greg really is. He's just that kind of prototypical, really good teammate. Do whatever you need him to do. Always going to be the first guy with the high fives in the dugout, whatever it is. So Good Guy Greg. But I was asked to get a report on Greg Garcia. I did note that he made the roster, so he's on the team, but anything that you can share with his adoring fans would be appreciated.
I really wish I could share. Like we talked about earlier, I think his role on the team changed quite a bit over the course of the offseason between signing Machado and Kinsler. He started a game at second base. Whenever the Padres think Urias is ready to go, hopefully they don't see Urias as more of a utility. Well, they don't. They don't see him as a utility guy. They see him as a starter. So what's going to happen between Garcia, Urias, and Kinsler, I think, is up in the air. My guess is Garcia might be the first one out. Unfortunately, sorry, Good Guy Greg fans, but we'll see. It's hard to say at this point.
Well, if nothing else, they'll get a chance to see him this week in St. Louis. So everybody get your fix of Good Guy Greg, and then who knows what's going to happen after that.
Get those memes ready.
Exactly. All those Good Guy Greg memes. We'll have to work on that for this weekend. We talked about it a little bit off the top. The additions this winter have sort of pushed the timeline forward for the Padres. But how far forward do you think that this is a year? I mean, we talked about all the ways that they could be competitive this year. How exaggerated do you feel like the timeline is now with the things they've done to be competitive now?
Well, I think the big debate related to that is the Padres starting rotation. Like we talked about, there's some pitchers out there. Dallas Keuchel makes a lot of sense. I don't know if the Padres have enough money left to sign him. My guess is they don't. There was a rumor that the Padres actually had to take out a loan to cover the first couple of years of Machado's deal. So, if that's true, it's hard to see them going after Keuchel or another starting pitcher like that. I think a lot of their competitiveness this year is going to come down to the rotation. We're looking at probably a low 80s win total. I think that's probably best case scenario coming off that 66 win total last year. They might be able to squeak their way into the wild card. I think that's the goal. Is to make the wild card and see what happens from there. Next year, though, is go time. There's a lot of talk about Andy Green as well, being sort of his future in San Diego being up in the air after this season. Personally, I'm not sure how fair that is. I'm never really the fire the manager guy. I'm always like, really, I don't understand it quite as much. But there is talk about Andy Green this year and seeing, hey, is he going to be the manager who leads the Padres into this window of contention, or is that going to be someone else? But yeah, I think a wild card is certainly something to hope for. It makes a lot of sense. I made a bet with one of the radio personalities here in San Diego, Stephen Woods. I think I took the over on. I don't want to get this wrong now. I took the over on like 76 wins, I think.
Okay.
I'm pretty confident with that.
Yeah, it seems there's certainly enough talent to get it done, that's for sure. And more to come. I mean, I was reading even today that this Padres system, the organization as a whole, a baseball prospectus writer said it's the best the best system he's ranked since he's been at Baseball Prospectus. So there's
Wow.
still a lot of a lot of talent yet to come that isn't even there yet. So whatever happens this year may just be a precursor for what is to come. When you look at this series with the Cardinals, are there a couple of key things to look for from the Padres, or that you're going to be keeping track of this series?
You know, I don't know if I'm at that point yet in the season where I'm like looking for something. I'm just like, oh, Fernando Tatis,
just enjoy
hook
it.
it into my veins. Just let me watch some Jacks, man.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not like we're in playoff, mode right now where you're thinking, oh, if this falls this way, and
you're not scoreboard watching yet. You're just okay.
Jeez, Machado. It's just I'm not over it. I'm not over the magic yet. I'm still just enjoying it.
And that's we've come a long ways since we talked here last time. So being able to just sort of sit back and enjoy what's going on with the Padres is a big step up, I would say.
Yeah. How about you, Terrace? Is there something you're looking for?
The Cardinals starting rotation got off to a pretty rough start. Now, they were in Milwaukee and facing Christian Yelich when he had the best series of his life. So all of that may be a little skewed to the circumstances of the team and the fact that balls were flying all over the place in Milwaukee opening weekend. So, but none of their starters outside of Michael Wacha really had very good first appearances of the year. So for me, that starting rotation needs to look more like we expected it to. Jack Flaherty's getting the opening day start, which is huge for him. But he did not look great in his first start. So definitely looking for some rebounds of the starting pitching. And then the middle of the Cardinals order is a little sketchy right now. They've got some obviously great talent at the top with Matt Carpenter and Paul Goldschmidt, but their 3-4-5 went like 1 for 15 yesterday. So that's not going to be a trend I would like to see continue. Let's just suffice it to say that that's got everyone a little concerned. They also have the most strikeouts in the National League right now. So not a great trend. So, Similarly, we're a week into regular season games. Hard to draw too many hard lines or dramatic conclusions, but things to watch for nonetheless.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting first week. And of course, in the NL Central, all of those things are magnified because that division is going to be insane. So every little move, every little stat or point on a graph is being looked at very closely already. So I don't know, but I think it's going to be interesting to see how they look against teams not in the NL Central for the first time. And of course, everyone's going to be anxious to get a look at Fernando Tatis and Manny Machado as always. So should be a good time in St. Louis for sure. I know a lot of fans who are very jealous that Machado is in San Diego and not in St. Louis because they were also in need of a third baseman. But they opted for a first baseman instead and then signed him to an extension. So
that's pretty solid. I don't know. I'm not used to being like the fan of the team that has, the star player like that. But I mean, it's a pretty solid. I don't even want to make a joke about it being a consolation prize because it's not even a funny joke,
Yeah, no, it's
Goldschmidt is the best first baseman in baseball. You got to be pretty happy about that.
I think I was a little more instantly pleased with that than a lot of people were. I think as soon as the Goldschmidt thing happened, people were like, okay, yeah, but what about Harper?
Really?
Yeah,
that thinking is just like beyond me.
I agree, but it happened nonetheless. So it took a little while till Harper was off the table, I think, before a lot of people were like, okay, now let's remember how good Paul Goldschmidt is. And then he hit 3 home runs in one game against the Brewers, and everybody was like, oh, that's what it is. No, I expect him to be a lot of fun to watch all season. He's not the most exciting personality in the world. But he's very, very fun to watch play baseball. So I think regardless of what happens in any series, I'm still going to be really happy to watch Paul Goldschmidt play.
Yeah, as would I.
Well, Chris, is there anything else that we didn't get to as far as the Padres and the Cardinals that the people need to know? I think we covered a lot of it.
Okay, well, I got to ask about my boy. He's hurt right now, but
he
Jed
should be
Jerko,
back, though. He should be back,
okay.
I think, for this series.
Okay.
So he rejoined the team in Pittsburgh, and the plan is for him to be ready for opening day, which means there will be some other roster movements at that point. It was a less challenging decision coming out of spring as far as those infielders that were playing the backup roles because Jed was hurt, but he should be back, and we didn't really see a whole lot of him this spring, so I don't really know how much more to say as far as what he looks like or how much I expect him to contribute. He's in an interesting spot being the backup now to Matt Carpenter and Paul DeJong and Colton Wong, who's kind of playing out of his mind right now. So I'm not sure even how they're going to juggle all of that, but having him healthy certainly gives them depth that they don't have right now. Not to get too far off track, but in Monday's game, they ran out of players. They used their last position player, which was Matt Wieters, as the backup catcher, which meant that Yadier Molina played half an inning at third base after Matt Carpenter was ejected for arguing balls and strikes in extra innings.
Okay.
So it was
not the best time to do that.
Interesting. The strike zone was real bad all day. And then I think it was actually a check swing that they called him out on, and he said something, and I didn't think he should have been thrown out, but whatever. It happened, and Yadier Molina played third base.
Was it a threat about robot umps? Because if I was a player and I got bad calls, that would be the first thing out of my mouth every time, like, robot umps, let's do this. Come on.
I don't think it was, but I think it should be every time now, because the strike zone was a nightmare in that game. And it was two different umpires, because one of them got hit in the head so many times with foul balls, he had to leave the game. So Monday was very strange. It was probably the weirdest game that I've seen that I can recall. So many things happened. That doesn't usually happen this early in the year, but it happened, and Yadier Molina played third base. So all of that is to say, had Jed Jerko been on the roster, things would have probably been a little less complicated in extra innings the other day. So looking forward to that, as well as just getting Jed back on the roster, getting him some at-bats. So that's all I can really tell you. Similar to the circumstance for Greg Garcia, I don't really know what it means for Jed at this point, but he certainly gives them depth, and that's helpful in any circumstance.
Yeah. He's like a starter on the bench. That's pretty rad.
And they have three of those right now. They have Jed Jerko in the infield, and they've got Jose Martinez and Tyler O'Neill, who could probably be starting, who are their bench guys and backup outfielders. So they've got some pretty legitimate depth, assuming their starters pull their weight, which is the real question right now. But again, not to get too far off track, those are the middle of the order hitters that didn't do a whole lot in the first week of the season. So we'll see how that all goes. Well, Chris, I will let you go for the evening, and this was fun. I appreciate it.
This was fun for me as well. I had a blast. Thanks, Tara.
Exciting times for Padres fans, to say the least. Thanks again to Chris for joining me. It will be interesting to see how all of those pieces fall into place for the Padres. Also will be interesting to see how the Cardinals recover from a rocky start to their season, especially on the starting pitching front. As I mentioned, recording this on Tuesday night, so not totally sure who those pitching matchups will be between the Padres and the Cardinals in the opening series at Busch Stadium, but as always, there will be plenty of fanfare on Thursday and beyond as the Cardinals finally get back to St. Louis. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you get all of the series previews throughout the season, as well as About Last Night and all sorts of other additional content. Follow everything going on over at Birds on the Black, which is where you can find these, as well as lots of other content about the Cardinals throughout the year. And follow me on Twitter. We can talk more about this as the week goes along. Until next time, I'm Tara Wellman.